Welcome to the Confessions of a CRA podcast. I'm your host, Jasmyn Adams. I went from a struggling, aspiring CRA to landing my first CRA job with no monitoring experience or certification, and was able to fast track my career to a senior CRA making six figures in less than 2 years, and then on to multiple six figures plus a CRA coaching business. I teach aspiring CRAs how to attract and break into their first CRA position with no monitoring experience or certification and fast track their career using mindset and career development strategies. Now, let's dive all the way in. Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Confessions of a CRA. I have another great topic for you guys today. We're finally gonna get into the right experience. What is the right experience, and how do you know if you're ready to land your first CRA job? Now, if you've been following me and listening for some time now, you've probably heard me mention the right experience, the right basic research experience, enough of the right experience. You've probably heard me mention that several times. So today, finally, it's here. We're going to talk about what is the right experience. What do I mean when I say that? We're going to talk about a couple of stories from my clients so you guys can have some real life examples of some different situations and outcomes based upon each person's experiences. And we're going to talk about how do you know if you have enough of the right experience, and then get into, when do you know if you're ready to apply? So before we dig into the details of what the right experience is, which I refer to as CRA Gateway Skills, I've broken them down into 10 categories. But before we get into all that, I want to share with you a story about one of my clients who came to me, and she was a study coordinator. She had been a study coordinator for several years, about 2 years, I believe, 2 years or a little over. And she did not think that she had enough clinical research, basic research experience for her to apply to her first CRA job. Yes, she had a bachelor's degree. She had, and this wasn't her first study coordinator position, by the way. She had other clinical research experience. I don't remember exactly how much, but she definitely had quite a bit of experience, and she still didn't feel like she was ready. So when she first came to me, we spent quite a bit of time in the beginning doing a lot of mindset shifting, which I typically, if I'm being honest, I've never met a client who didn't require a certain amount of mindset shifting, some more than others, but everybody requires mindset shifting, right? Including myself. When I work with my coaches, even to this day, even though I've done a lot of personal development, I'm in therapy, I have therapists, I do a lot of self-development, personal development types of things. I have had multiple coaches. I currently have 2 coaches, well, 3 coaches technically, and I am still constantly doing mindset work. We all have to constantly do mindset work. It's not just something that you reach and then bam, you're done. You got to keep pushing, keep working on it. So I digress. Back to the story. But we spent a lot of time really focusing on shifting her mind to thinking that she wasn't enough, that her experience wasn't enough, that she needed more, that she did not need to get an additional degree, that she did not need to get clinical research training or complete one of the clinical research programs or try to get some more certificates. We spent quite a bit of time shifting her mind into seeing how everything that she had done, her background, her experience, the skills that she currently had at the time that we met, we spent a considerable amount of time going over and reassuring her and showing her how that was more than enough. She was a strong candidate right where she was, and that she was more than ready to not only land her first CRA job, but be successful in the job and create an amazing, successful career. And guess what? I was right. She not only attracted 2 entry-level CRA jobs, both at top CROs, but she has already been receiving additional offers, bonuses, really fast tracking her career, and she's really had a lot of success. So when I go through these things today, I want you to really hear me and really think about the categories that I'm talking about, and not just say, oh, well, I only did that one time, or I just did this, or, I know what it is, but I only helped out a little bit on that. Any type of experience, any level of experience, whether you feel like it was just a quote unquote little bit, it still counts. It still matters. It's still important, and it's still relevant, and it still can help you land your position. So keep that in mind as I go through all the different categories today, as I discuss all the skills today, and really think about, okay, where have I had that type of experience? And I want to point out that a lot of times we forget some of the things that we've done, right? We've had so many different experiences and opportunities. Some of us have multiple jobs. I was one of those people that they call job hoppers. So sometimes you just forget. You forget about experiences. So as I go through them, take notes, jot down all the categories, jot down all the gateway skills, and really take the time, once you listen to the full podcast, to journal and think about all of the experience that you may have had in these categories. And this will really give you a good assessment of where you are and what the next steps are for you. So let's go ahead and dive in and talk about, what do I mean when I say the right experience? Okay, right? What do I mean? I say this a lot. So like I've been telling you guys, I divided them into 10 categories, 10 main categories, and I refer to them as the CRA Gateway Skills. And essentially, when I say gateway skills, I'm referring to the skill set and the type of experience that companies look for in potential CRA candidates, because these are the types of things that typically determine whether you have a strong enough foundation to be successful in the CRA role. Now, please note that this is not an exclusive list, and there are some other skills outside of these that I'm going to go over today that would also be beneficial to landing your first CRA role. So this is not an all-inclusive, these are the only skills that you need type of list. These are just the 10 main categories, the 10 main types of skills that I have outlined in order to give you guys and my clients a baseline of how you can assess where you are and how you can identify experience gaps and other types of experience that you may want to acquire prior to landing your first CRA job, or other experience that you may need to acquire that may be preventing you from landing your first CRA job. So the first category that we're going to talk about is TMF, ISF, and essential documents. So TMF, trial master file, ISF, investigator site file, and essential documents. So as a CRA, you'll be required to review and help maintain both the TMF and ISF. Sometimes with some companies, the TMF not as much if they have an internal regulatory department that maintains the TMF, but sometimes you may be asked to reconcile the ISF against the TMF for your sites. And you also may have to make sure that the appropriate documents are being filed and maintained throughout the course of the study. Again, depending on the company that you work for. So you'll need to know what the essential documents are, and that's the documents that individually and collectively permit evaluation of the conduct of a trial and the quality of the data produced. And they also serve to demonstrate the compliance of the investigator, the sponsor, and the monitor with the standards of GCP and with all applicable regulatory requirements as well. So there are far too many documents to do a deep dive in this podcast. And I want to stay on topic here. So we're not going to go into details with all the different types of essential documents that are out there. But just so you have a basic idea of what I'm referring to, essential documents could include documents like the 1572, for example, or IRB approval letters, or IRB acknowledgement letters, financial disclosure forms, the protocol signature page, or PSP, the clinical trial agreement, or CTA, the IRB approves consent forms, and those again are just to name a few. So I will provide a link in the notes section of this podcast episode to the E6R2-GCP guidance so that you can take a look at the complete list if you're interested in learning more. But sometimes the ISF and TMF site-specific files can be pretty massive. So depending on the length of the study, the number of patients enrolled at the site, and then other study and or site-specific factors, it might take some time for you to go through them as a monitor, or it might even, of course, as a study coordinator, any role that you have, it could take some time to go through these files and make sure everything is being documented and maintained appropriately. So as a monitor, this is only a small portion of all of the responsibilities and duties that you'll manage. So you have to really know your stuff and be able to review both the ISF and the TMF fairly quickly, which is why this skill is on my top 10 category list. And having that TMF ISF experience is priceless. So all of you CTAs out there that are like, I'm tired of filing documents, or all of you study coordinators who have to maintain the ISF, or regulatory coordinators who are solely responsible for the ISF, and you're like, I'm so tired of dealing with all these documents, just know that it will ultimately pay off big once you land that first CRA role. It will definitely give you an advantage. So the second category, or the second gateway skill, is EDC, electronic data capture, and that includes data entry, query, and DCF resolution, or data clarification form resolution. So as a monitor, of course, you will not be entering any data, as this is solely the site's responsibility. However, during interim or routine monitoring visits, you will be responsible for reviewing data entry in the EDC and comparing it against the source or source documentation. So if you identify any discrepancies between the two, you will be responsible for creating queries and following those queries until resolution. So having this type of experience as a study coordinator, as a data entry coordinator, even if you have experience as an in-house CRA and you've had to review the EDC and identify any reoccurring trends or patterns that might be deviations, all of this type of experience, again, this is why it's on the list of the top 10 categories of the gateway skills that I recommend, because as a monitor, coming to the table with this amount of experience or this type of experience will definitely, again, help you be a great monitor. So the next category, the next skill that we're going to talk about is patient interaction or subject visits. So as a monitor, you will most likely never interact with the patients unless on those very rare occasions where a trial may require a sponsor representative to be present during the first patient dosing. So you might be wondering, well, why would this be a gateway skill then? Well, although you will not be interacting with patients, if you have experience conducting subject visits, this gives you an edge because you have actually walked a patient through a clinical trial from the site perspective. So in other words, you have a better idea of what to specifically look for during your visits as a monitor because you understand what happens at the site level with the patients. It can also help you better understand the site staff and what they go through, giving you an advantage on how to create and nurture stronger relationships with their sites. So a large part of monitoring, of course, is site management, and you're going to have to go to the sites and you're going to have to create strong relationships. You're going to have to be able to communicate effectively with your sites. So as a study coordinator, for example, you have an experience at the site level. You know exactly what study coordinators are going through. So being a monitor, then coming to the site, you'll have a lot more empathy, a lot more understanding of what is going on at the site and how you can better assist and help them. And then from that subject visit patient interactive perspective, you also have a better idea, a hands-on direct idea and amount of experience where you know exactly what the patients are having to deal with as well, and you know exactly what the site is having to deal with when it comes to getting the patients to comply, when it comes to scheduling those visits and conducting those visits, and perhaps why the deviations keep reoccurring and things of that nature. So you have a much better understanding as a whole of everything that's going on, and that comes into play with the big picture. And it also helps you be a better monitor because, like I said, you can better effectively communicate with the sites and have more empathy and understanding of everything that's going on as a whole, as opposed to you need this document and you're trying to figure out, it only requires a signature. So why hasn't it been signed yet? Why is it so challenging to get this signature? You understand the complications that may involved with getting a signature, and it's not as simple as having the PI come in and sign it. Even though, high level, the people at the top think that that's what it's about, that it requires a little bit more. So the next category, the next gateway skill is adverse events and serious adverse events. So identifying and capturing adverse events, and especially the serious adverse events or SAEs, are a primary component of every clinical trial and monitoring, as it is a crucial component for assessing patient safety. Sometimes knowing what to capture can be a bit tricky, especially for oncology trials or neuro trials or other therapeutic areas where there's a lot of adverse events and potential serious adverse events. So if you already have experience with AEs and SAEs, then this obviously gives you an edge with monitoring as you review source and subject medical records. You'll be able to recognize these events a lot easier and quicker, and you'll also be able to better help the sites when they come to you with information about a potential patient and the medical history, and they're wondering whether events should be captured as AE and or SAEs. So you can see how having this type of experience, whether it's as a study coordinator, whether it's as perhaps maybe you have a drug safety role, the pharmacovigilance role, whatever you can get this type of experience, you can see how having this level of experience can definitely be beneficial as a monitor. Now, the fifth category or gateway skill is ICFs, informed consent forms, and the consenting process. So conducting the consenting process and informed consent forms is another task that you will not be performing as a CRA. However, reviewing ICFs and ensuring that each patient was consented properly is a top priority as a monitor. Having experience with either drafting ICFs or conducting the consenting process gives you an edge with this task as a monitor, as you're already familiar with the form and process, so you know what to expect and exactly what you should be looking for. So this, of course, will help you. Again, I said there's a lot of different responsibilities that people typically don't think about that monitors have to take care of when going out on site, and you don't exactly have a lot of time. Most of the time, you don't have enough time at all, if I'm being quite honest or quite frank. So being able to perform all these tasks quickly is essential in order for you to survive the job. So having this informed consent experience, this consenting process experience, can definitely be another lifesaver, because you're then able to quickly go into the subject binders, the subject medical records, the subject files, and quickly assess for new patients whether or not they were consented properly and whether or not they signed the form correctly, and all of the things that are required as a part of this process were done correctly. Now, the sixth category and gateway skill is ICH-GCP, ALCOA-CCEA, good documentation practices, and HIPAA compliance. Now, all these things are industry quality standards for regulating clinical trials. And all of these are guidelines, principles, and practices that were ultimately created to ensure patient safety and data integrity. So GCP, or Good Clinical Practice, is an international ethical and scientific quality standard for designing, conducting, recording, and reporting trials that involve the participation of human subjects. And then ALCOA-CCEA, which is ALCOA ICH-GCPE are principles that the industry uses as a framework to ensure data integrity for both paper and electronic. And it's essentially used to ensure complying with good documentation practices. So the acronym, just so you know, stands for attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate. And then that last part, CCEA, was added after the fact, and that stands for complete, consistent, enduring, and available. Now, HIPAA is a federal law that protects sensitive patient health information from being disclosed without the patient's consent or knowledge. And as a CRA, you have to keep all of these guidelines, principles, practices, and laws in mind at the forefront while monitoring. This podcast is sponsored by the CRA Solution. Are you an aspiring CRA struggling to get your foot in the door and land your first CRA position, almost ready to give up on your dream? Well, I have the perfect solution for your problem. The CRA Solution Mentorship, a 12-week online course and coaching program where you learn how to attract and break into your first CRA position with no monitoring experience or certification. After you go through this program, you'll no longer spend hours searching and applying to jobs because you'll have a proven job attraction system that consistently brings job opportunities directly to you via networking and LinkedIn. You'll also have a clear, thorough understanding of how to successfully brand and market yourself throughout your CRA job search, to strategically sell yourself and land your CRA dream job offer without feeling lost or confused, wondering if you're on the right path. If you're ready to land your first CRA job, visit aspiringcra.com and book a one-on-one sales call today. So being a CRA is much more, as you can see, than just traveling and making sure the site has accurately transcribed data into the EDC. It requires a lot of analytical and critical thinking skills. So if you already have experience with these things, it will of course make the transition of becoming a CRA a lot easier. These guidelines, principles, practices, and laws aren't skill sets that can just be taught from a book in a classroom, but they require real-world field experience to truly grasp and understand these concepts. So having prior experience before becoming a CRA is not only ideal, but almost essential if you want to be successful. Otherwise, it will be very challenging to effectively do your job as a CRA because, like I said, you have so many responsibilities and so little time to get all these things done. So you really have to know what you're doing, and you really have to have a good foundation going into the role. Now, the next gateway category, the next gateway skill that we're going to talk about is IP accountability and inventory. IP meaning investigational products, and IVRS or IWRS, which is interactive voice response system or interactive web-based response system. So reviewing IP accountability and inventory is another responsibility of the CRA while monitoring. So as a CRA, you're responsible for ensuring that the IP is being managed properly. And you have to ensure that the IP or investigational product is being received, stored, dispensed, and destroyed or returned appropriately. So most studies use an IVRS or IWRS system to help manage this process. However, there are some studies that do not use a system and require manual management, which of course makes your job as a CRA more challenging. So if you already have experience handling or managing IP in any way, shape, or form, or if you already have experience using one of these systems, you are better prepared to manage IP accountability and inventory as a CRA. And as you've probably figured out by now, as a monitor, you have many responsibilities, right? While you're on site. So you have to be able to not only complete this task, but you have to be able to do them fairly quickly. Otherwise, you won't have enough time to effectively manage everything. And I know I've said this several times. You're probably like, okay, we get it, but I can't say it enough because I always have people come to me, clients that come to me, even after they've landed their job, saying, oh my gosh, I heard you, I listened to you, I know what you said, you told me 1,000 times, but I just did not realize just how serious it was and just how many responsibilities we have and just how little time there is. So I want to hone in on this point. If you know me, you know I don't like beating that dead horse. But I really have to keep reiterating it because I really want you guys to get it. And this is why it's also, just so you know, I don't want to venture off too far from the topic, but side note, this is part of the reason why it's challenging to land that first role. And because it's hard to decipher, okay, who has just the right amount of experience, who has good transferable skill experience that would still make, maybe don't have these exact skills, but they have a skill set that would still make a great CRA. It's hard to kind of decipher these things because there's so many different moving pieces and companies just do the best that they can in order to identify potential talent. So that's where we got to come in at, and we have to sell ourselves and showcase ourselves and present our stories the best way possible so that we can stand out and let them see, hey, I'm a great candidate, right? So back to the list. The next category is CTMS, Clinical Trial Management System. And there are many different types of clinical trial management systems, but essentially CTMS is a software system focused on the project management aspects of the clinical trial from startup through the enrollment and monitoring to study closeout. And it includes project management, milestones, deadlines, and tracking, depending on the level of complexity of the system. So all established or larger companies use a CTMS, including some of the smaller companies, and even at the site level, sites use CTMS systems as well. So having experience with this type of systems makes training you as a CRA a lot easier. There will be a lot of different systems that you will have to become very familiar with. Lots of systems. Don't want to go into details about that, but just know that there's a different system for everything. And then depending on the company you work for, there might even be different systems per sponsor if you're working for a CRO, for example. So if you're able to grasp these concepts quicker, these different systems quicker, because you already have experience working with some of them, then that will definitely give you an advantage and give you an edge, because regardless of what specific system you have experience with, they're all kind of similar, and some of the actions with the different ones, once you have experience with one, being able to navigate the other ones can be a little bit more intuitive. So it definitely gives you an edge. Now, the next category or gateway skill that we're going to talk about is EMR, electronic medical record systems, and source documentation. So, as I mentioned earlier, your most obvious responsibility as a CRA is reviewing the source documentation, which is the document or location in which data collected for a clinical trial is first recorded. So many sites are converting from paper to electronic source, and most of the more complex indications, such as oncology and neurology, they utilize EMR or electronic medical record systems as source versus creating study-specific source documentation templates. So you'll have to review source docs and reconcile it against the data entered into EDC. And if you already have experience creating source docs or completing source docs during subject visits or capturing subject health information in the EMR or reviewing EMR, then this will certainly help you and give you an edge as a new monitor. Again, going back to the time constraints, and any little type of experience that you have had prior to becoming a monitor is definitely going to help you once you're on site. Now, last but not least, the last gateway skill that we're going to talk about or cover here today is laboratory sample collection, processing, and shipment. So most studies require some type of lab sample collection, And as a CRA, you'll be responsible for ensuring that all samples were collected per protocol and lab manual, as well as ensuring that the samples were processed and shipped correctly. Storage as well. So if the samples were not shipped out the same day, you will also be responsible for ensuring that all samples were stored properly. So if you already have experience with any of these lab tasks, this too will better prepare you as a monitor and give you an edge as a new CRA. So if you're a study coordinator and you have to process lab samples, or if you are in another role and it requires you to process lab samples or maintain the lab shipment documentation, and you're like, oh my God, this has nothing to do with being a monitor. I can't wait until I land my first CRA role because I'm so sick and tired of this. Well, guess what? You're on the right path. This will definitely help you as a CRA because you'll be familiar with the process. You'll be familiar with the documentation. And as you're going through these things, when you're on site conducting your visits, you'll have a better eye for what you need to look for, what may or may not be missing, or what may not be completed correctly. And you'll be able to go through these documentation and these things a lot quicker. So that covers all 10 categories. Now going back through them, the first one was TMF, ISF, and essential documents. The second one was EDC, and that included data entry, query, and DCF resolution. And then the third one was patient interaction and subject visits. The fourth one was AEs and SAEs. The fifth one was ICFs and the consenting process. The sixth one was ICH-GCP, ALCOA-CCEA, GDP or good documentation practices, and HIPAA compliance. And then the seventh one was IP accountability and inventory, and IVRS and IWRS. The eighth one was CTMS. The ninth one is EMR and source documentation. And then number 10, lab sample collection, processing, and shipment. These are what I call the CRA Gateway Skills. And like I said, I've broken them down into 10 different categories. So this can give you an idea of, okay, am I on the right track or not? Have I acquired any of these skills, a significant amount of these skills? Am I still missing some? Things of that nature. And it's not that you have to have all of them in order to be ready to apply for that first role. I would say if you have less than 50%, definitely reassess and definitely see where you have some gaps and what you may need to acquire. And I always refer back to those three main roles, which I call the three primary gateway roles of a CTA, a CRC study coordinator, and the in-house CRA. Those are the three primary gateway roles that I always refer to that will give you the best opportunity to gain as much experience in all these categories as possible in that given role. So this brings me to another client that I have in mind who came to me, and she had a ton of experience. When I say a ton, I mean a ton, like years of experience as a CTA, as a clinical research specialist, as a study startup specialist, as a study coordinator. She had a ton of experience, and she was getting interviews, but ironically, during her interviews, the recruiters would say, well, you don't have enough experience. You need to get more experience. So when she came to me and she shared her story, I was like, there's no way they think that you don't have enough experience. Because when I say a ton, I mean a ton. And she had a bachelor's degree too. So education wasn't an issue. And she had, I would say, about almost a decade worth of clinical research experience. So I immediately knew that although the recruiters kept telling her that she needed more experience and experience was her problem, I immediately knew that that was not her problem. There's no way it could be her problem, which is why she was getting the interviews. So as we dug a little bit deeper, we discovered that it was not being able to articulate her experience and not being able to answer the questions during the interviews, during the phone screens, the questions, the industry specific questions that they were asking to really highlight and showcase her level of experience. And this might be your problem, but just know that if you do have experience in these areas that I'm referring to, these gateway skills, and you're getting that type of feedback, that's not what it is. And it's not that recruiters are being dishonest or not giving you accurate feedback. There's only so much that they can legally relay. They can't exactly share these verbatim the internal notes that they have. So they kind of just give you what they feel like they can give you sometimes. And sometimes you have to read between the lines. Sometimes you can take it for face value. It's hard to really give you a one answer response as to why they do these things, because it's like, okay, well, why don't they just tell me the truth and say what it is? But that's where hiring coaches and mentors and getting help comes in at. And that's where, having that third person, that objective eye to take a look and give you that feedback can be helpful. But yes, if you have these skills, this experience, and these categories that I'm talking about here today, experience is definitely not your problem when it comes to landing your first CRA role. So how do you know if you have enough of the right experience, right? We've talked about all these different things. You've given me several examples, Jasmyn. So how do I know? How am I going to know if I have a gap in my work experience that needs to be filled? So I would say, like I said, I led to this a little bit earlier, but if you have experience in at least 50% of the gateway skills that we discussed here today, then I would say that you're on the right track and that you are ready to apply for your first CRA role. If you have at least 50%. Now, sometimes I do have clients and even people that reach out to me, and I've discovered that fear is holding them back, because some people will have experience in 70, 80, 90, even 100% of these gateway skills, and they're still like, I'm not ready, I don't think I can do it, and it just boils down to fear. And I get it. Being a CRA, it's a very intimidating, a very complex role, and it includes a lot of responsibility. So I totally get it. But the only way you're truly going to know if you're ready, and the only way you're truly going to know if the CRA role is for you, is to get that first position. So if you have experience in at least 50% of these gateway skills, I would say that you are ready. Now, of course, the more experience you have, the better, absolutely. But at least 50% gives you a good starting place. So you can say, okay, I'm ready to go ahead and start doing the things that I need to do to attract that first role, to land that first role, to break into that first position. And I also want to point out that I mentioned this in one of the earlier episodes, but I want to bring it up again. And that acquiring this type of experience, acquiring experience in these gateway skills and these 10 categories is exactly how you can land your first CRA role with no monitoring experience and no CRA certification and no advanced degrees and none of all the other stuff that people come to me and say, this is what I need to do. I need to get all this extra stuff. So this is exactly how, for the people that are wondering, well, this girl is crazy, there's no way I have to have these things in order to get my job. No, this is exactly how you can land that first role without all the things that you guys typically think that you need. So if you have a bachelor's level degree, if you have the right experience, and the right experience meaning the things that we went over today, but you're still struggling to land your first job, regardless of what you may have heard from recruiters, friends, Joe Schmo, you do not have to have monitoring experience. You do not need a clinical research training program or a certificate or another degree or more time as a CTA or a study coordinator or another CTA or study coordinator job. You don't need any of those things. You just simply need to focus on career development. And what do I mean when I say that? You need to focus on learning how to position yourself in the best way that clearly tells your unique story, attract the right attention, and successfully sell your unique value proposition. So all this can be accomplished through personal branding and marketing, creating a resume that attracts the right attention from recruiters and ATS, cover letter, the same, LinkedIn profiles that attracts the right attention from recruiters and hiring managers, using specific job search strategies and honing in on your interviewing skills, knowing how to sell yourself. That is what you need to focus on. I repeat, if you have all these things that I just talked about, the bachelor's level degree, the right experience, and you're still struggling, your problem is a career development problem, and that is what you need to be focused on. So I hope you guys are clear now. Whenever I refer to the right experience from now on, we're on the same page. We know exactly what I'm talking about. And for those of you who have none of this experience and you're an aspiring CRA and you want to be a CRA, well, now you have a list of things that you can target. And now when you go out and get these entry-level roles as, a CTA or entry-level study coordinator role or things of that nature, you can look at the job description and you can compare against this list that I gave you here today and say, okay, well, how many of these skills can I acquire by taking on this job? So that will also help you assess whether these jobs that you're looking for or looking at will be good fits and if they're in line with your CRA path. So that wraps up today's episode. I like to hear from y'all, so please DM me on LinkedIn if you have any questions about today's episode or if you have any topics that you want me to cover. The things that I cover in these solo episodes are just for you, so please let me know what you want to hear. Next week, we're going to talk about how you can assess yourself as objectively as possible and see where you stand in your CRA job search so you can identify your specific problem and get more detailed into what specific career development problem you have and see exactly what you're missing and what you need help with so you can stop wasting time on doing all of the things and spinning your wheels getting nowhere. So make sure you subscribe and follow this podcast so you can be notified when it drops because you don't want to miss it. Thanks for joining me today, and I can't wait to share what I have for you next week. Thanks for hanging out with me. You are now one step closer to hitting your career goals. And if you are an aspiring CRA who wants to take this work further, come work with me inside of my coaching program. You can go visit aspiringcra.com to learn all about it. If you're looking for more inspiration, check out Jasmyn Adams' Aspiring CRA TV on YouTube. And come follow me at Jasmyn Adams or The CRA Solution on LinkedIn. You can also check me out over on Instagram at The CRA Solution. And hey, if you like what you hear, don't forget to follow this podcast and make sure that you download, rate, and review this episode.